Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and in this episode, we're going to be reviewing the Pro Sim H-Pattern shifter. Now, they claim that this shifter is the best you can buy anywhere for a true H-Pattern shifting experience in your sim rig. And it feels like you're using an H-shifter in a real car. Also built to withstand heavy and aggressive use, just by glancing at the mechanicals resting behind the plexiglass plates, you can see that this is a serious piece of hardware. Now, I don't believe you can set the expectations levels any higher for a piece of simulator kit. This shifter is actually manufactured in Quaife Engineering's production facility. Now, Quaife has already established itself as one of the premier driveline component manufacturers in the industry, with some pretty impressive offerings for the car racing enthusiast. But now, it's time to put this shifter through the Sim Racing Garage review process. So let's get started. Now for a closer look at this fantastic shifter. Actually, I think I'm just going to start calling it a gearbox, because really that's what it is without the gears, and we'll get to that later on as far as the details on how it works. But first off, you just have to look at this as a package, and it's really beautifully done. It's anodized all in the right places. It's anodized throughout, and we'll see that in a little bit also. It's all nice aluminum bits. Everything is chamfered. All the edges are nice. This is a cast piece right here that everything else is bolting to, and you can see the bottom here, how he's got 6 big bolts and 2 small ones here, bolting everything to the housing there. And this is a connector plate here that will also connect everything on the top. So on the bottom, we can actually see some of the innards and how some of this stuff is going to work as we move the gear selector. I think you guys can see that. If I can hold it good enough. Now, I've got this thing already set up on the easiest amount of pressure that I can put on it, so that as I'm handling it, it's easy for me to shift and show you what's happening. We've got some electrical connectors under there, and of course that's the USB connector. This connector here is for a future, and we'll talk about that a little bit, future gear lockout hydraulic system that's going to run on this and be available. Let's see, what else can we see here? On the front, of course, we see the main shaft that works everything coming out of the front. And if you can see there, see if we get a good focus, that's actually threaded inside of that rod. And I assume that's going to be an attachment point for the hydraulic gear lockout when that's available. We got plexiglass on both sides so we can see all the beautiful inner machining work done and how the gears are working. And we have it on this side here. And this is also another electrical connector on this side that's going to be used as part of the hydraulic system. Here is a tensioner adjustment that we'll be going over in detail later, and that's the tension on that. It actually adjusts the tension on your shifts itself as far as the shaft moving in and out over there. You see over here moving in and out. And then we have another adjustment inside of here. Whoops. This big nut over here is actually adjust how much tension it takes to go from gear to gear as far as sideways with the shifter when we're making it do that, selecting the gear. So I've got all those, or both of those rather, on the easiest mode right now. And once we get into the insides and take this plex off, you'll be able to see it a lot better. Right, so the cup here for the shifter shaft that it goes into, a nice anodized unit. Got some 5mm bolts holding everything together, and the shaft goes down. This is a spring up here that actually is for when we actually go to get reverse. You put it over just like you would in a regular car, and you push it forward, and the spring compresses, and that's your reverse gears. And you do have a reverse gear back and front like that. And of course, if I just move it back up, you can see the spring pops back up, and now we're in the regular gear shifting sequence. Now, this shifter is actually a 6-speed, so it goes over just like a normal transmission would. First, second, and then third is in the middle, fourth is back from the middle, and then fifth and sixth are over to the side, like that. And of course, every time it goes back to center, it pops to the center. So it's a self-centering, just like a real transmission. Well, that's the outside look of this. There's not much else to see, I guess. But the really exciting parts, at least for me, are what's going on inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plexiglass off. I don't drop it. And I'm going to take this aluminum sheet off here, and that'll allow the camera to get in there and get some light down on top of things. And we'll actually change the camera angle so we can get down close to the side and see the inner workings of how all this complicated mechanism in here is actually working, and how we're registering gear shifts and things like that, the electronics. So we'll do that when we come back. All right, so now we've got the plexiglass and the aluminum top plates removed from the housing. Just a word on this plexiglass that we took off. First off, on the right side, if I'm looking from the back of the transmission, the plexiglass is easy enough to get off. It's just 2 screws up here, 2 2-mil screws. But there is something you need to be aware of, that when you take this out, there's actually a groove back here in this aluminum piece, and when you put it back in, you have to get it in that groove for it to swing past this part of the housing. If you don't, then it won't swing past that, and if you get too far or whatever, if you get too far towards me, or if you get too far towards the gear selector mechanism, it just won't go. You have to get it in that groove. So that'll keep you guys from having to do anything that might want to scratch up, that might end up scratching up your beautiful piece of plexiglass here. So we'll take that and put it aside. Now on the other side, there's also a plexiglass with the electronics in it, that the little connector here, and I had to take that off to get this plexiglass off. The manufacturers recommend that you do not do that to this. But I had to do it because to get the proper video picture that I wanted to show you guys. The aluminum top plate comes off easy enough. It's just 4 screws. And only one thing to be aware of on this one is that there is a groove cut into it right here. And the reason that radius groove is in there is because they have a counter radius section right here, a little groove, that accommodates the rise of this bracket that will hold the hydraulic gear lockout. Just want to make sure that that is lined up with this, so it'll lay down flat. Because if you don't, it goes the other way, it's going to kind of slide over, and it's not going to line up correctly. So just a little indexing groove, really. Just something to be aware of in case you forget and you're putting it back together. Again, trying not to scratch up our beautiful anodized aluminum bits here. Okay, so let's get back to how this thing works. The shifter shaft, the main shaft, runs, of course, all the way through the housing. It starts over here and goes all the way back to our shifter back in here. And there's some things attached to that. Now, what's happening here, first we'll go with the main shaft on how we're selecting from front backwards. And I purposely got you over here to where this tensioner is. If you look at the shaft back in this part, and as it moves forward, you'll see that there's some grooves in here. Not only are they grooves, but you can see that they have beveled ramps on the side of them. There's one here, and there's actually one back inside there that you can barely see when you have it fully extended. And it's riding on either a ball bearing. I'm actually going to pull this apart so we can see what's inside of there. Probably a spring ball bearing setup, something like that, that it's riding on. So it gives us the selector feel. So it locks into, that would be the neutral position, and either going back to 4th or up to 3rd in the middle, then you can see how that's working, holding it where it is, because it just rides past whatever that tensioner mechanism is in there and holds it there. And of course we use this tensioner to screw in this grub screw, and we'll see that in a minute, to adjust the tension and back and forth. I have it backed out almost all the way now, because I want to be able to show you guys again how to do this stuff without it jumping around me, really having to hold this thing down while I'm shifting it. Right, so now this shaft actually has some gears over here that are riding on top of it. I thought this was copper when I first got it, and I contacted ProSim, and they told me that this is actually a bronze lubricated, impregnated with lubrication gear setup so it doesn't have to be maintained. And you can see it actually moves when we're rotating it side to side, which is going to select whatever gear rod it is that the gear selector is in at the time. So if we go over here and look at this gear selector, I'm going to show you that, first of all of this is riding in some very sturdy pieces here. You can see these guide rods here. This one runs all the way the length of the housing. And you can see how it's got a little fork there that's catching the front part of this bronze guide. Then we've got another guide right here that's going into these lower rods that we have on both sides. So you can see that's fitting into a groove here and fitting into a groove over here. So that's capturing this whole mechanism so it doesn't go anywhere. This silver piece here has a selector cam hanging down the bottom of it. I'll try to show you that as I move this back and forward here. Let's see, there it is. See it there? So what that's doing is we'll ride in the counter groove on each one of these selector rods. And you can see we've got 4 of them in there. Right, so that's riding in these grooves here. So if I pull this all the way over and select a gear, you can see I'm actually moving that rod now because this cam has come over and caught that groove. And it'll go backwards and forwards and move that rod. Right, easy enough. And then of course if we're in the middle, it's going to move the middle rod. And if I'm over here in the 5th and 6th gears, it'll move that rod. And when I go to reverse all the way over, you can see, whoops, going the wrong way, the other rod moves. And that's the rod all the way at the other end. So that's where our reverses are. And then when we release it, it springs back to the middle rod, or springs back to the neutral position, if you will. Right, so that's why this feels like a real gearbox or a real transmission, because it is set up like a real transmission. We just don't have dog gears and synchros in there. We just have these notches in the rods, and the rods performing the task of selecting which gear we're going to be in. Now, if you look down here, this little electrical connector, actually there's a small circuit board out front of these rods. Now, each one of these rods has a silver plate on it, which is actually a magnet. It's not really a plate. And on the other side of each rod, there is a corresponding sensor. Let's see if I can move this around here so you guys can see those. There you go. And you can see each rod, you can see it actually is kind of a curved shape to them, so they match the radius that the rods are actually set up in. And each one of these rods themselves are riding in some bushings. If I can get you a look at there. You can see there's bushings throughout here like this. You can see one up here for this part of the rod. If we look at the rear, again, they're back there. So there's bushings throughout here that these rods are riding in to keep them nice and straight. So what happens is, once I shift, and we'll use the middle rod as an example here, this one right here, because we're in the neutral position, that rod moves back or it moves forward. And you see when it moves forward, it's very close to its corresponding sensor. So what we have here is basically a hall sensor setup for the electronics. And that's how we understand, or the gearbox here understands which gear you're in. If I'm close to the sensor, I have a certain electrical signal. If I'm back in neutral, it's further away, that signal gets less. And of course, if I go up to 3rd gear, it goes way back into the little hole there. And now that sensor knows where that position, so that would be telling me that it's 3rd gear. So very nice, no rotary resistors or pots in here. It's all a magnetic sensor setup. Very nice and ingenious, really, the way he did this. I really like this. This was very clever to come up with the way to do this. Again, a testament to how these things are built and the designing and engineering that went into actually producing this unit. Right, so that's how everything works as far as the mechanisms go. We'll get back to, actually next what I want to do is go ahead and go over the adjustments as far as the tension for how hard it is to push the rod back and forth, how hard it is to actually turn that rod, so when I'm selecting different gears. And there's also an adjustment for the back cup here as far as the throw of the lever. So we'll go over those when we get back. All right, now we're ready to make some adjustments. Before I get to the actual adjustments down here in the mechanical parts, there's also another adjustment that you can make with this extension that actually comes with the shifter. This extension will actually, because it's going to be a higher point for your shifter handle, actually increase the throw of the shifter already before you even make any modifications down here to this cup that we'll get to eventually. So this extension will fit on here once we take the 5mm bolt out. Take the knob off, and this extension goes right on like that. Could be simpler. two 5mm nuts here, or not nuts, rather bolts. And what they do, of course, is put a clamping action on top of the shaft. And you can see you really got a lot of leeway here for how high this can go. But the higher it goes, of course, because of the lever principle, or the pendulum principle, the longer that shift's going to be versus shifting down here in relation to where your hand is. Right. So not only that, but this extension is an option when you buy. When I bought this ProSim Lite, it was an option, but I didn't get it because I really didn't need it the way I was setting my stuff up. But it's nice to know that you can actually take this one off and use it on the same shaft because they're the same sizes. So if you want to switch between gearboxes and you want to keep a handle on there, you can actually, like if I wanted to use this handle all the time or actually put this handle on here, then you can actually move them from shifter to shifter if you were going to use the extension part. Right. So easy enough for that. That's kind of self-explanatory. There is some extra here, though. If you see here, there's threads in here that hold this part on. So you can actually raise this a little bit and fine-tune it just by using that screw. And when you're done, just run this nut, the 17mm nut up there, and tighten it down. And then you're good to go. All right, so I thought I would include that in the adjustment section. Now let's get to another adjustment. Turn the knob over there out of the way. And that is the tension on the shift rod, the main shaft that runs through here. So how much tension it takes us to move that back and forth. Now, to do that, we have to adjust with the spring tension in this housing right here. That's a kind of a grub screw or set screw with a 17mm nut on it. So basically what we'll do is you get your 5mm into the end of this grub screw rather, and loosen it up. Okay, once it's loose, then we can run this in or out to our heart's desire until we get the tension we want. However, there is a limit for how far you can go in, and I'll see if I can get there real quick for you. Yeah, there it is. You can't shift anymore when you got that screw too far in. So what you want to do is pull it out, and now I still can't shift quite enough. There we go. So now that's pretty hard to shift. I'm probably not going to want that much tension, so I'll take a little bit off. But the good thing about this is it's an outside adjustment. We don't have to do anything else to actually run up real quick and adjust that. So of course we're just going to screw the nut back down when we got what we want and hold it, or rather get that nut down there. Hold the grub screw while we're tightening the 17mm nut. And that's it. Easy peasy. All right. Now, the next adjustment, and you notice I've left the plex off. I know I told you in the last segment that I was going to put everything back on, but I forgot. You actually have to have that off to make the next adjustment. And I'll explain this in a second. First off, this is the adjustment for how much tension it takes for us to move this sideways, this way. You see how it's moving in the front too. Okay. So what you want to do is get your fingers on this thing, and it's hard to get your finger underneath and rotate it this way. So the best way I found was doing it over top of the main support bar here, part of the containment bars that hold all the assembly in here, and just kind of twist it that way. And if you loosen it, it's going to make it easier to go sideways with it. And loosen it is taking it towards the front. If you're going to tighten it, again, I like to do it on the top, then you tighten it towards the shifter. It's really not that hard to turn, and now I can tell it's already harder to move it from side to side. Now the reason I left this plexiglass loose is if it's tight against the frame like this, and you're in there with your finger trying to hit that nut, what happens is that your finger gets up against the plexiglass, unless you have really skinny fingers, and leaves marks on internally to the plexiglass, which is not that big of a deal, obviously, but me being the perfectionist that I am, it kind of rubs me the wrong way to see that kind of thing. So I just take all the screws out, and if you see, once you do that, because of this electrical connection that I reconnected, remember I had that off in the other section, but I got everything normal back up and connected again, it actually will hold it out a little bit. And as I described before, you can actually just kind of let it sit there like that, and you got all the room in the world then. And then when you're done, All you got to do is press this back up against there and put your screws back in, which I'm going to put a couple screws in right now because I don't want this flopping around when I'm doing the other adjustments that we're going to be doing. Let me go ahead and run this back in here. I'll run one in the bottom over on the other side. All right, and just kind of snug it up a little. Just don't want it moving around too much. Now that's done. Now we'll go with the adjustment, for the bearing that's inside this cup. And this is a little bit more involved to get this right. And really it's only a two position that you can do here. So you only got one or two positions. Right now it's in what they call the long throw position or longer throw position than if this bearing assembly was higher up inside. So you can see it's kind of down low in there. And now the shifting action is longer because the pivot point has been lowered, which makes it longer. We bring the pivot point up, obviously, because our hand is staying in the same position, it becomes a shorter throw. Right, so simple enough to do this. The only thing is you need proper tools to do this. You can't get those cheap, made in China, $7, $8, $10 spring clip pliers and use those with the interchangeable tips or the interchangeable mechanisms that go on them. They're just not tough enough or strong enough. Remember, this gearbox is made in a real gearbox factory, and it's made just like one. So they're using real car parts, right? Nothing that's real thin. This is all heavy-duty stuff. All right, so make sure you get some good tips or good pliers that have good tips that fit in these holes. Another thing, make sure they fit the holes. Too small in these holes and then you try to squeeze it, it's just going to slip out and something's going to fly somewhere, hit you in the face, or you might scar up something that you didn't want to scratch up. Who knows? You might lose the clip, went flying and you can't find it. So anyway, get yourself a decent set. Right, so I'm going to take this clip here off. Now, of course, it's under tension, so it's something we want to be very careful doing. And what I'm going to do is push down on the top cup here that's retaining that spring at the same time that I'm loosening the clip, and then slowly release the pressure as everything comes up. At least that's the idea. So let's go ahead and get these in here. Make sure they get down in there. And you see how they're down in there now. I don't know if you guys can see that. Hopefully the video is high def enough for you to see that. So they're down all the way where they should be. So I'm not going to lose the grip of that spring. Now, all in one motion, I'm going to push down on this and squeeze, and then let the whole assembly rise up the shaft. If everything goes great, nothing will fly anywhere. So let's go ahead and do that. And there it is. And I'll go ahead and pull the spring off. And there's what the spring looks like. Right. That one was safe enough. Now, this is what the cups look like that come off of there. And you can see they're very nicely done. Just everything on this is just impeccable. It's just so nicely done. I really love this kind of stuff. If you guys watch my videos, you know I love great CNC machining and people who take the time to get it right. Right, so spring comes off. Then we got the bottom retaining cup. And we got a couple of spacers in here. And the reason why I have two spacers in here is because this top spacer that came off is the spacer that goes either on the top or the bottom, depending on the position of the bearing plate inside this cup. So I have moved it down before, so that's why it's sitting on top. This other spacer doesn't ever move. It stays on the top all the time. Right. So once we have this done, now we can just go ahead and release or take off the cup itself by undoing the screws. And they have washers on them, so be mindful of that. You don't want to lose your little washer there. Little 5mm units. Okay, get the rest of these off. Bear with me as I get these done. Okay. All right, now the whole assembly will come up, but be mindful when you do this that there is a tab on the bottom of this. There we go, let's better look at it. It extends down lower. And that always goes to the left side of the housing here, if you're looking at it from the rear. And you can see here, it's got a little serial number on it. But that always goes up to the left, and I'll show you inside of here. There's a little bumper that's been attached to the side of this housing, and it hits that when you're going sideways, so that has to go in there or it won't work right. You see there's not one on the other side. So now that we've got, whoops, now that we've got the assembly off, that's why I use a wood table. It doesn't hurt anything when it happens. The whole shaft comes out, obviously, and there's a spacer under there. Again, this is a spacer that doesn't ever go anywhere. It stays there all the time, whether or not we're going to have the other spacer on top of it or not. So, put that aside. Now we can work on the cup and moving things around. So you see here, there are spring clips inside of here holding this bearing assembly, and this thing moves around with the shifter so we can do our H pattern. And on the bottom, there's another one right there. So what I need to do is move this up, and if we look on this side again, you'll see that there's a groove going around the top part right there. Goes all the way around. And the distance between the groove that's holding the spring clip there and the top groove there is this spacer. So that's why we move this up or down depending on where the location is of that bearing within this cup. Right. So what we're going to do now is take the springs out. And I'm going to use a different set of pliers for this because these, I want to pinch these together. The other ones I use to spread apart the spring, but these are going to be pinched down. And what I'm going to do is take this spring, and I'm trying to do it so you guys can see it, and just squeeze it together so it releases, and then bring it up to this next groove, and then release it again without it flying off somewhere. Again, that's another reason to have the proper tools to do this with. So let's see if we can get that done. All right, squeeze it together. And I'm going to slowly bring it to the top, and then release it. There we go. It's great having the right tools. And now the bearing assembly will just fall, or you can just push it right up to the top like that. And now all we have to do is go around to the other side and take that spring, which you can see the gap in there, and move it to the groove, internal groove in there that we have revealed since we pushed the bearing assembly back towards the top. So we'll do that. Push down in there. All right, and that snapped right in. Sometimes it won't snap all the way in. You just take your pliers and just push on the section that didn't snap in, and it'll go ahead and usually snap right in for you. All right. See how easy that is, and how easy, and it is really made easy with you have the right tools. Okay, so now we're going to put the shaft back in. But remember, now that we've moved this up, we have to add that little spacer on our bottom part. So that spacer stays there all the time, and now we're going to put the small spacer back on top. And now it's ready to go back in the cup. And the orientation of the cup, I've tried it different ways. I don't see any special way to put the 4-bolt pattern back on this housing here. It just goes any way you want to, as long as they line up 4 ways. It's pretty square. So remember, our tab, this guy needs to go to the left side so it hits that little bumper in there. So we'll make sure that's oriented properly as we got it back in. And now it's back in there. Now all we have to do is secure it again. Before I try to put that spring back on the shaft, I'm going to put all of these bolts back in. Again, bear with me as I get this done. Shouldn't take too long. All right, snug them up. I'll do a final proper tightening later in case I need to adjust it again. I just don't know the reason to torque it all the way down right now. Right, so now of course we have to replace a few parts on our shaft. First we have to have the spacer. Remember, that's the spacer that's always there regardless if it's up or down. Then we need to put one of the cups back on, and of course the flange has to be pointing up so it captures the spring. Easy enough. And the spring back on. Now, I'm going to take the spring clip and the pliers and just get that in there down on top like this. And I'm going to try to just take it and push on the top of that spring clip and compress everything down, because there's a retaining groove in here. So you guys can see that. It's really not easy to see because it's not that deep, but there is a groove right in here that retains that clip. So I got to push it far enough down to grab so that clip can just slide into that groove and it'll all snap together. At least that's what we hope will happen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I could have just used the pliers and follow it down also, or taken the pliers and push it all the way down like they do in the video, past that groove and then let it push it back into. But you can also just go ahead and push the whole thing assembly down at once. So I'll see if that's going to work for me this time. Like that. So now our clip is back in and we're looking good. Yes. So now we can put our shift knob back on, but what I'm going to put back on is going to be the extender, because I am going to use the extender for my application as far as how I'm mounting this to my rig. And I'm just going to snug it a little bit because I'm probably going to be adjusting it. And we'll go ahead and just tighten up those screws on the side, just so it's not falling off. And again, just go ahead and rotate how you tighten these screws up so that one of them is not bearing the whole weight of the clamping pressure. It works a lot better that way. Easier to tighten up. Right, so now get my knob back on. And that's, again, you can't even see it's so high now. But that's, again, just a little 5mm screw on the top. Tighten that down. And we're good to go. Okay, so now what I'll do is put, this time I really am going to put the plexiglass and our aluminum plate back on top, get everything normaled up. In the next section that we'll get to, it will be the section on what I'm going to do to mount this shifter or this gearbox to my rig. And remember, I want to make this thing really solid so it feels like I'm really shifting on a car. If you got a loose connection, if it's not securely attached to your rig, it's just not going to feel natural. And boy, this thing feels natural just right now. I can't imagine once it's tightened up hard on my mount how it's going to feel. Super. Okay, so we'll get that next. Okay, now we're ready to mount the shifter to my Sim Experience Stage 4 rig. Obviously, if we're mounting this big boy, we're going to need some good hardware to keep it mounted nice and solid so we can hammer away on this thing when we're shifting and it won't move on us. So what I decided to do, after a lot of trial and tribulation and trying to think of the best way to get around doing this, I decided to go with this, which is a 15 series profile. And I got this off eBay at 8020 Inc. And this is a 3-inch by 6-inch profile that's actually 6 inches wide. And I got it 6 inches wide. Well, number one, they actually had a piece that was 6 inches wide. And also the spacing for the back of this, or back and front for the mounting points, is actually 5 inches across. So this is going to facilitate that quite nicely because I'll still have an inch, or rather half an inch, on each side of the plate. Now, obviously I'm going to have 2 of these, and we're going to kind of set it up like this, but it's going to be a lot more space to match the holes on the shifter. And I'm going to use these brackets. Now, these brackets obviously are 15 series also, and they have 8 bolts or nuts or screws or whatever you want to call them for each bracket, which I'm thinking that's going to be enough to keep it nice and solidly mounted and it won't move. Now, I have a problem over there at the Stage 4 rig. It does have the corrugated, not corrugated, but it has the stamped aluminum plate in the bottom of it, and which is very nice looking, by the way. If you've ever seen some of the other videos, very nice and shiny aluminum. But it has that diamond stamped on it. The problem is there's a area, and you'll see this in the mock-up, a raised area as it goes towards the rear of the rig, that's not going to let me get one of these brackets in because, first of all, the raised area is too close to the back of this, and you'll see what I'm talking about, to the back of this. I could put it up this high, but then I'd have to make some kind of a spacer extension to come out and grab it. So here's my idea. I'll just put 2 of these on the side that I don't have to worry about that, and you'll see that in a minute. And then on the other piece, I imagine this is going to be solid enough, even though I'll be shifting back and forth. The back and forth motion with all these screws in here. I'm pretty sure that's going to be solid enough. But in case it isn't, I'll have the front one mounted just a little differently. I'll have it mounted with a bracket in the front like this, and then another bracket in the back. And that will let me keep the motion from the shifting equalized. So when I'm shifting forward, it'll go against the front. When I'm pulling back, it'll go against the back bracket here. And of course, this one being mounted with the 2 brackets, I'm guessing that it should be okay. I mean, I'm not going to be hammering that hard on this shifter, but I just want to make sure that it's nice and solid and feels directly connected to the rig, just like it feels in a car. Because I'd hate to mount this to something that's flexing and not get the full benefit that we get from actually using this shifter, which is, like we've seen before, just like shifting a real car. It's solid as a tank. Now, what we'll do next is go over to the sim rig. I'll put this stuff in, and we'll do a mock-up and see how it looks. Now we have the shifter in place on top of the blocks in our mock-up. And I'm going to go down here and show you guys what I have here. There's the 2 brackets in the rear mount on one side. And then over here, of course, you can see I have a bracket, like I said, on the back side, and one more over here on the front side. Now, there's a couple considerations here. And remember, I told you there was a raised level as this diamond stamped aluminum plate goes back to the rear, and you can see it right there. That's actually that's the second level. There's another one. I'm going to bear with me because I'm hand holding this camera. And I'm going to go over here in the back and show you guys. There's the first level that goes up, and as you can see, there's no way I'm going to get one of these brackets back here without doing some modifications, some spacers, and a lot of other work that I really don't think I'm going to have to do or really need to do to get this job done correctly. So we'll just leave the 2 in the front like it looks now. Now there is another consideration, and that is seat movement. And here you can see the seat actually rocks to the right, and I did this on purpose just to see if I had enough clearance on the shifter housing itself. Now as I rock it over, that's a pretty extreme angle. And I usually don't have the seat set up to move sideways like that, the roll, if you will, that high, because I just want to feel what the car is doing. I don't want the seat throwing me all around the rig, although it's completely capable of throwing you around the rig if you wanted to do that. But I like to keep it just so I have the clues, or cues, if you will, the input of what the car is actually doing without all that other jerking around. Plus, on a long race, all that jerking around, it really wears you out, makes you tired faster, but also it makes you have to go to the bathroom. So that's not a good thing either. Right, so there's another shot from the rear, and we'll go around to the other side. And I think this is going to be fine with the clearance that I have here between the seat and the shifter. I've already sat in the seat, and you'll see me obviously sitting in the seat once I have everything bolted up and shifting and using it when we do the driving section of the video. So we'll go to actually what we're going to do to attach the screws to all this hardware, and I'm going to have to drill and tap a couple of screws for the mounting places on the transmission itself. So we'll get to that next. Alright, so I'm making my final adjustments here to make sure that the shifter is sitting exactly where I need it to be. And now I'm going to take the solid punch and a hammer and make the marks that I need to mark, so the screw holes can be drilled precisely where they need to be drilled. And I have to be very precise here because I don't have, well, practically any wiggle room because of the diameter of the screw that's going to go in the holes, and the mounting slots or holes that are actually in the frame of the shifter itself. So again, I have to be very, very precise here and very careful with what I'm doing, because it's so easy to get it just a few millimeters off, and then I'm going to be in trouble because it's not going to line up correctly on the profiles. Then once I have that done, then I can get my spring punch. And what this does is takes these little marks that the solid punch makes and opens them up. And I'll do each one of those holes, 2, 3, maybe 4 times, just so it looks like to me, and after you do this a while, it's just like anything else. You kind of can look at it and go, okay, yeah, that's good. That'll work. So I'll go to each one of these marks and make it larger so my drill bit doesn't have any problems finding the mark. And that mark and that dent actually will guide the drill bit so it goes straight into the 80/20 profile like I want to. And I'll check them over again, and as you see here, I'm making just one more on that one. All right, so now that we're done with that, let's move on to the drill press and get these holes drilled. The 80/20 is mounted to the drill press. We're ready to start drilling. Make sure it's all lined up. I have a clamp holding it, it's extra security there. And then I'll go ahead and just turn it on and go ahead and get our hole drilled. Pretty simple. Once you have everything lined up, that's the hardest part, getting things lined up. It is just aluminum, so in the drill press, the bit's going to cut through pretty quickly. Yeah, pretty easy job, really. And it does make a lot of aluminum shavings, as you can see, but we'll get the vacuum out and clean those up as I drill each hole. Next, we're actually going to tap the holes. Okay, now we're ready to use a tap and put threads into the holes that we drilled. And I like to use this machine cutting lubrication. It makes it much easier to cut the threads into a hole than if you weren't using anything at all. And it's pretty simple here. You just put it to the beginning of the hole, make sure you're straight. I usually start very slow and just work it through, let it go, and you can see it breaks through at the very end, goes really quickly. And then I'll make sure that I hold it steady as I am pulling the tap back out. Of course, this makes a little bit of a mess. We got some lubrication on the front. We're going to have some in the back. And when I actually take a screw and chase the threads that I just made, just to make sure everything is okay as far as the threads are concerned, and that'll also push some of the gunk out the back. Right, looks like we got a great hole, so we'll just take the screws out and then we'll clean up all the gunk out of the back, and then we'll be ready to mount the shifter to these blocks when we get all this done. Okay, the blocks are mounted, all the screws lined up perfectly. And the reason that happens is because we did take our time and measure everything very carefully before we marked our holes. Next, we'll take these corner mounting brackets and get those on and see what they look like. All right, you can see the brackets are mounted now, and there's only 2 bolts in each one of these brackets, and I'm probably going to leave it that way because I got a lot of surface mount area here with these brackets arranged the way they are, and I don't think I'm going to need more than that. Going through the gears here, everything's looking good. It feels good. Going all the way through all 6 gears, and we'll do both of the reverse gears here just to make sure that everything feels good there. And what we'll do next is get it sitting on the rig and mark our holes to drill to mount it. Everything's sitting on the floorboard now, so we're going to mark our holes that we're going to be drilling in the floorboard. And you can see I'm just going to use a hammer here, and the same thing that I used to mark the holes for the transmission to fit on top of the 80/20 blocks. It's going to be a little tricky to mark the holes underneath the transmission. Of course, the transmission has to be mounted like this. Everything has to be exactly right where it is. Make sure I get accurate holes. So you can see I've got blue tape up here to keep from marring the transmission as I get my hammer sideways in there and tap on it just so I can try to get a mark off of there. It's a little difficult, but it did get it done, so everything's good there. Next, we'll actually be drilling the floorboard. All right, we're drilling holes in our floorboard. This goes pretty easily once we have our holes marked properly, and it's only like 3/16 aluminum plate, so it's really not hard to get through. But it does make a mess, so we'll clean up our mess after we get all the holes drilled, and then we'll come back and put the bolts in and see how everything lines up. All the bolts are now in the bottom parts of the brackets and going through the floorboard of the rig. As you can see here, I've got 2 bolts in each one of these brackets. And again, the reason is I don't think I'm going to need any more than that because there's so much surface area here being mounted onto the floorboard and mounted to these 80/20 profiles. I don't think I'm going to get any movement once I get all this bolted down. And as I bolt it down, I'll be using on the bottom of the floorboard. Remember, this floorboard is 3/16 aluminum. And I want to make sure I don't just have a small washer under there. So I'm going to use these guys right here. These are fender washers. And you can see that they have a lot of surface area to them. And they make a nice metallic noise when you drop them. So we'll use these underneath that aluminum plate so that we make sure we have a lot of surface area that we're mounting to on the bottom of the plate and kind of sandwich it between the top brackets over here and these big fender washers. I don't think we'll have any problem with movement. And because this is a motion rig and we've got these big LFEs, one way down there, it's kind of dark, and one right over here that shake this rig, we're going to use these nylon safety nuts to mount everything to make sure nothing comes loose. So what we'll do next is get everything bolted down, get in the seat, and see how it feels. Alright, so now we're in the car, sitting in my seat, and we're going to go through the gears here with the shifter and make sure that every gear is within reach. I'm way over in fifth there, which is very easy reach on this shifter for me from my position. So it really feels good. We're going to do reverse here, make sure we have that gear before we go run. And you can see it just, you can flop it around like a real shifter. It's just, this thing is just a natural feeling piece of hardware, if there ever was such a thing. And you can see when I'm shifting right away that my mounting blocks or my mounting solution here is doing a great job, and I got it dialed in right the first time as far as my reach and everything. Just got lucky, I guess. So anyway, we're driving the Audi Quattro at Nürburgring in Assetto Corsa. So I'm going to comment a little bit about, this shifter is just the cat's meow, the bee's knees. It really connects you to the car like never before. It's adding an additional layer of immersion or realism to my sim driving now that I sorely missed. I really was hoping someday somebody would come out with a nice heavy duty, real feeling H-pattern shifter. And I have to tell you guys, Pro Sim has done it. They've just nailed it with this thing. And I really love driving with it. It's just a blast to drive with. And I don't know what else to tell you about it. You really, something like this, really, you have to be sitting down and using it yourself to experience it in a way that makes you appreciate what this thing is doing as far as immersion and connecting you to the car and your driving experience. So what we'll do is just turn up the sound. If you guys want to follow along and finish me on this lap on Nürburgring, that's great. If not, you can just go over to the Final Thoughts segment, and I'll see you there. Final thoughts on the ProSim H-pattern shifter. It's been a long wait for race car simulator enthusiasts to finally get a proper, feels like you're in a real car H-shifter. I can say without a doubt that this shifter accomplishes what other H-shifters in the past just couldn't do. From the parts used to the quality of the build on this unit, you can tell that somebody knew what they were doing. And the design and engineering that went into the development, just brilliant. So much attention paid to the details throughout the design of this shifter, like the gear selector rod shown here. Just really top flight work being done. That, combined with having them manufactured at Quaife Engineering, just proves that the guys at ProSim made all the right moves on this one. Now, I tried hard to make up a list of cons on the ProSim H shifter, and this is the best I could come up with. Number one, you need to provide a solid mounting solution to realize the full potential that this shifter has to offer. It has to be mounted stiffly to realize how stiff that the action is on this. Plus, it's obviously much larger than most shifters that you've ever seen. So you're going to need space on your rig to get it set up properly. And at 1,195 pounds, excluding VAT, it won't fit everyone's budget. But once you have one of these units in your sim rig, you'll know why it costs so much. It's just that good. On a personal note, for me, this shifter has added another layer of immersion to my sim driving that I was sorely missing. When driving a car in iRacing, a Assetto Corsa, R-Factor 2 that has an H shifter, I feel totally connected to the car now. The ProSim H shifter just gets it done. It's returned a sense of newness to the sim driving experience. At the first time driving it, I immediately started searching for H-pattern shifter cars to drive in all the games I had, from a Mazda Miata in iRacing to a Shelby Cobra in a Assetto Corsa and everything in between. It was like driving them for the first time, just having a blast. Now, when I was having all this fun, I began to think how valuable this shifter could be to someone who has an H-pattern shifter in a car that they own. This would be an excellent training tool for circuit racing, autocross, drifting, or track days, and I'm sure some other things I haven't even thought of. But back when I had my Honda S2000, I was able to take it out to Virginia International Raceway for track days. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And if I had had access to this shifter, I know the training would have got me up to speed much quicker once I was out on the track. So I would not hesitate to call this shifter a viable training aid to any driver. And once ProSim gets the hydraulic gear lockout system finished and available, we'll have yet another layer added to the immersion factor of this shifter. All in all, if immersion is your top priority in sim driving, you can't go wrong with this shifter. Obviously, I highly recommend it to anyone who has the means to get it. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel.